How much should you have saved for retirement? Well, that's the question we're going to answer on today's episode of Decoding Retirement. Hi, I'm Bob Powell, and today we'll be talking with Ann Lester, who is author of Your Best Financial Life. Ann, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So one of the things that we aim to do on Decoding Retirement is to go behind the headlines. And I want to share with you some headlines that came out recently. It was a study by Fidelity Investments, and Fidelity, in essence, reported that Gen Z plan participants, 401k plan participants, had saved $11,300 in their 401k plan. Millennials had saved $59,800. And one of the interesting things about this survey to me is Fidelity and others, JP Morgan, T. Rowe Price, others have said there are certain savings targets that people should aim for. 1 times your salary by age 30, 3 times by age 40, 8 times by age 60, and 10 times by age 67. And when I look at the average salaries for Gen Z and millennials, what strikes me is that those asset amounts are way below targets. And I'm curious, one, your reaction to the survey, and also what's the actionable advice for people who may be behind the 8 ball?
Yeah, so I always want to approach these numbers with a tiny grain of salt. So one is averages hide a lot, right? So some people are saving nothing. Some people just started saving last week. Some people have been saving 10 or 15% of their salary since the day they started working, and they get the gold star. But let's just say that $11,000 number. If you are 30 years old, that means you should have saved $110,000. No, I'm doing that math wrong. If you earning $56,000 a year and you're 30 years old, you should have saved up $56,000, right? So that is a big gap from $11,000 to $56,000. So number one, the oldest Gen Zers are 27, so they got a little more time. Number two, there is a lot of job hopping happening with younger workers, and so, to what extent have those people worked for the same company for the entire time or rolled their money over into the new plan? So it's possible that those numbers may be slightly understating the amount people have actually saved. But I think the headline is probably right, like people should be saving more money.
Right. So I think about that. I have a daughter. She's changed jobs twice now and left her 401k at her former employer and did not roll it over to her new employer or into a IRA. So in that case, we're looking at perhaps this possibility that she does have 1 times her salary saved or so.
Just not all in one place.
Right. So I'm thinking if someone is in that case, it's far better for them to roll over their old 401k to their new employer.
If they can, that's always, I think, the right strategy.
Right. And if not, keep it at the old employer or move it to an IRA?
It depends, right? And I know we'll talk about this a little bit. I wrote a book recently, and I dive into a lot of these questions. And one of the things you need to think about is, the mental tax on, dealing with it, which is non-trivial. It's actually not super easy. I know there is a whole bunch of initiatives to make this easier, but we're not quite there yet. Number two, if your old plan is the fees are high, you may want to roll it out into an IRA. If the fees are very low, if you work for a very large company, it's very likely that you are paying very, very low fees, and it's probably better to leave it alone. But you've got to do a little research to make that decision. The bottom line, though, is if you're leaving it in your own plan, it's safe. You just don't want to forget about it.
Right. So the important thing is if you have multiple accounts or one account, to use these benchmarks 1 times your income at age 30?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good rule of thumb. It's, when you get closer to retirement, if you're in your 50s or 60s, you might want to start digging in a lot more to these general rules of thumb. But certainly in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, I think those are very practical sort of ways to gauge whether or not you're kind of roughly on track.
Yeah. And what about if someone's behind the 8 ball? So they have 11,000 saved, they need to have 56, increase their contribution rate, spend less.
All of the above. So most people are not saving quite enough, right? And Gen Zers are actually, out of all the generations, when you look at the data, doing a better job of being closer to what we think people should have, because more Gen Zers are getting automatically enrolled in plans, and this is a fairly recent trend, but more employers are starting to automatically escalate their contributions or increase them. If you've been automatically enrolled into a plan at 3% of your salary, that's a great place to start, but it's a terrible place to stop. You really need to be targeting 10 to 15% of your salary over time. The trick is you don't need to try to get there all at once. So if, let's say, you're 25, you're earning $50,000 a year, and I'm telling you, yeah, you should try to save $5,000 to $7,000 of your salary. You're going to tell me to jump in the lake, right? So how do you get there from here? Well, you don't try to get there all in one go. What you do is borrow a trick from the Nobel Prize winners who came up with Save More Tomorrow. And that means you make a very strict commitment to yourself today that the next time you get a raise, which will hopefully be in 3 or 4 months at year end, you will take half of that raise and direct it towards your long-term savings.
All right. So the common advice, though, is for people to take advantage of the full employer match. And oftentimes that means contributing 6% in order to get 3% extra, which puts you at 9%.
I think that is 100% directionally where you need to be. The question is, if you are starting out and you're in your early 20s and you're living in a city that is expensive, that's just really hard to get there. And I guess the thing I want people to take away is you need to have that as your goal to get there. You don't have to start there if you're still trying to figure out how to balance your checkbook. Like don't set this incredibly high bar, fail, and then say this is never going to work, I give up, right? Make it a plan. How am I going to get from where I am today to where I need to be in a year?
All right,
and then you step into that gradually.
So we can throw out the ramen noodle diet for now?
Well, if that's what you need to do to stay out of debt, you need to be eating ramen noodles. But the next time you get a raise, you can take a little bit of that money and upgrade from the ramen noodles and also save more.
Yeah. So when I think about debt, I think a lot of these younger workers are only they're two things. One is they're trying to save for retirement, which seems implausible when you're in your 20s, but also pay down student loan debt,
right.
and that's a hard thing to do. You've got these two huge expenses.
Well, and rent. Let's not forget rent. I mean, it's a lot, right? So you're looking at, I think a lot of people starting out are you get your net paycheck, right? You've paid your payroll taxes, you've paid your income tax, you've paid for your health insurance, and what's left is already 60 to 70% of what you thought you were going to get, right? So that's already a little math. Then you pay for your rent, and then you pay for your student loans. Then with what you've got left, you need to create an emergency savings fund and save for retirement. So again, starting out, first job out of college, I think it's very unrealistic to expect people to be able to save 10 to 15%. So all I'm saying is start slow, start immediately. In the course of 3 or 4 years, you should be planning on building up that percentage that you're saving until you get to that 10 to 15%. And I think that is very doable for many people,
right.
Most people even.
So if someone does have student debt, I'm thinking, and especially because of Secure 2.0, some employers, not all, will match the amount that you're paying towards student loan debt.
Right. And that is, starting early for saving for retirement is the biggest gift you can give yourself, right? The power of compound returns is one of the biggest things most people don't get. So the dollar you save in your 20s is going to be worth, triple or quadruple that amount in your 50s and 60s. So it's really important to start early. If your employer matches, you should absolutely be taking advantage of that because that is free money.
Right. And if that's the case, would you suggest that they put all of their extra money toward paying down student debt or split it?
I think it's very important to have an emergency savings fund. I think that is absolutely critical. So I think if you have the opportunity to pay down your student loan debt and you have zero in emergency savings, you should be trying to do both of those. Once you have an emergency savings fund built up, then I think it's really important to take that money that you were saving for emergencies and throw it into your long-term savings, whether that's paying down debt and getting all of the match, or whether that's just starting to contribute money into the 401k plan as well. I think the question, right, about how much fun money do you give yourself is a really personal one. I am a walking example of someone who has been much more of a grasshopper than an ant. And I have never met something fun that I don't want to spend my money on. That's pretty true. So I struggle a little with that rule that says you should be, maximizing your saving from the get-go. I think if you feel poor and like you're missing out on things, it's a tough thing to feel. At the same time, you need to figure out how to pull your lifestyle down to a place where you're not increasing your debt burden, right? You don't want to be putting anything on credit cards. You don't want to be running up that debt. But I think, again, and I'm speaking especially when you're just starting out and you're at those very low salaries, you can expect fairly significant pay increases for the first sort of decade or two of your working career, and it is okay to let your lifestyle increase a little bit along with those increases in pay. The trick, though, is to not let your lifestyle completely eat up all of those raises. That's when you really want to boost your savings. So, like I said, I think you can start saving less in your early 20s and be targeting that 10 to 15% by the time you hit 30.
All right. So for young workers, this is extremely complicated. Let me throw out a rule of thumb for budgeting, where some people suggest 50, 30, 20 as the rule of thumb, 50% for sort of essential expenses, 20% for savings and debt, and the rest for fun.
I think that's a great rule. I guess I just, having talked to my own kids and a lot of young people who are starting out, that 30% is like not there because their rent's so high, right? I mean, so it's like really what's the bucket of money you have left after you pay off your housing, after you pay for a minimum amount of food, and after you pay for all your debt servicing, whether it's student loans or other debt you might have run up. And then that, to me, you should be saving half of it and spending the other half on fun.
Right. So we've talked about saving for retirement, paying down debt. There are other expenses that they need to think about.
Of
Disability
course.
insurance, maybe life insurance so that they can guarantee insurability, health insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think one of the biggest risks people run is the risk of catastrophe, right? And that is really what insurance is for. So health insurance is a very common catastrophe that is, when you're in your 20s, you tend to think you're invincible. You have no health problems, everything's great, and then you have an accident, all kinds of things can really derail you. So being underinsured, whether it's for health insurance, renter's insurance, if you're renting, right, you are one roommate forgetting to lock the door away from getting wiped out. Car insurance, right? Not insuring your vehicle for its replacement value, but just getting the bare bones minimum, which I think a lot of people do. I did that once and never again after somebody else hit my car, and that was it. I had to dig deep in my pockets. The car it's not worth insuring this car. It's only worth a couple $1,000. Well, let me tell you, I was very sorry I made that decision, right? So being underinsured is a huge risk for people, and most people don't understand they're running it. Insurance is cheap. Health insurance, different story. Every other kind of insurance is really pretty cheap.
And we have to take a short break right now, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about your book, Your Best Financial Life. Welcome back to Decoding Retirement. We're talking with Ann Lester, who is the author of Your Best Financial Life. Ann, I want to talk more about the book, and in the book you have some actionable advice I want to get to. One is this notion of STASH, the acronym, and how young adults can hack their brains to stash more money.
That's it. And we have actually been talking about it a little bit, right? STASH stands for sort of the 5 things you should be thinking about. Number 1 is save for a rainy day, right? That emergency savings fund. Number 2, tax advantage savings. So using the power of compound returns and the growth of that money to really grow your money. So T, tax aware savings. The A is assess your budget and pay off debt. So once you start your emergency savings fund, once you're getting at a minimum the match, which is your first target, right, to get that match and get the free money, then you start paying down debt. Now that is there's some disagreement in the people sort of talk about this stuff, about whether you should be tackling debt first or long-term savings first. For me, the power of compound return over time plus the 401k match, if you get it, is more important than aggressively paying down debt. Once you get that match, you get the free money, which is doubling your return because they're doubling what you put in right out of the gate. Then you aggressively pay off debt. After you are debt-free for everything but low interest rate debt, and again, people can argue about what that means. In my book, I refer to anything under 7% as being low interest rate, which is less than what you might earn in the stock market or in a balanced portfolio. So typically a mortgage, some federally guaranteed student loan, right, is below that 7% rate. Everything else you should be paying off as fast as you can. Then you go to the 4th step of STASH, which is the S, which is max out stay the course and max out on your retirement savings and get up to that 10 to 15%. And then the H stands for have fun. Right? Once you get to that, let's call it 15% savings rate, you really should then be allowing yourself to enjoy more. Maybe you're going to save more money and save it up for a bigger down payment or for a fancy vacation, or maybe then you want to think about not retiring at 67 but at 60, or that's when you have a little more room to think about different kinds of goals. But I think executing that stash is really about making sure you've got the emergency savings fund, you have eliminated all of your high interest rate debt, and you are putting, again, 10 to 15% into that long-term savings.
Right. So as you're talking, and you mentioned the ant and the grasshopper story a little bit ago, I think about how many young people have two things going on: present bias, the possibility that they value today's dollar more than tomorrow's dollar, and this notion of fear of missing out and having fun. So I'd rather go out to this and do that, or this concert, or go to London and see Taylor Swift, or whatever the case may be, because tomorrow I'll have another dollar and I can worry about that then.
So true. So true. I mean, I'm out there giving speeches and stuff, and in one of my speeches, I won't do the whole thing now, but I'm like, so I'm watching Netflix, and it's 10 o'clock, and the next episode starts, and I hit skip intro and think, wait a minute, what time do I have to wake up? And then it's 10:30, and then I hit skip intro again, and then the next thing you know, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and you think, I've only got one episode left. I'm going to keep watching, right? We've all done that. That is present bias in action right there, right? What is happening right now is far more important than the future, which is tomorrow morning, right? So it's a thing. I think the most important thing we can do is get curious about how we are wired. Like, it took me a really long time to accept that I am a grasshopper. I routinely start reading a book at 9:30, and at 2 o'clock, I'm like, oh boy, am I going to be sorry tomorrow. I still do it, right? And I have learned not to let myself start reading without either setting my phone alarm on and putting it across the room so I have to stand up to turn it off. Okay, that's my signal. Stop reading and go to bed. Like, I'm bad at that. I'm bad at that kind of impulse control, right? I just am. So I know that about myself with something as silly as staying up late reading a book, and I can then create hacks, turn on my phone alarm, set it out of reach so that I have to stand up, which disrupts me enough to go, wait, whoa, what time is it? I better put my phone, I got to go to bed. You can do that with food. You can do that with money, right? How do I understand what my own biases are, my own impulses, enough to figure out how to interrupt them, right? So one of the most powerful things that is now helping Gen Zers and anybody who changes jobs is getting automatically enrolled, right? When you and I started working, we got these, 150 or 200 page enrollment kits that we had to fill out and mail in with hundreds of pages of information to look at. Like, that was horrible. What the stats were, 50 to 60% of people signed up. If your employer signs you up, only 3 to 7% of the people drop out, right? It's magic. That's a huge hack. So is your employer automatically increasing your savings rates? That's another hack. Most people stay with the plan. They don't drop out because they know they should. If your employer doesn't do that for you automatically, you can do it to yourself by, again, either asking them to increase your contribution rate or just saying, hey, Jan 1, got a raise. I'm gonna bump up my rate, right? Those are hacks that will help you stay on track.
So as I look at your book and the topics in there, and I think about your children, which you, I believe, dedicate the book to.
Yes.
So have they incorporated your advice?
It's funny, my older son, like me, has an eye for, like, you could put me in a store with no price tags and I would unerringly find the most expensive thing. It's a gift. Not a good one, but it's a gift. And my older son is like that, but he is being really ruthless about creating guardrails for himself. And he is 100%, my children were also fortunate enough to graduate from college debt-free. That was something my husband and I felt very strongly about. They're on their own for grad school, but they have managed to, get out of college debt-free. And so that is a huge boost that and I said that to my son when he started. I'm like, well, look, you're not paying off student loans. You should be throwing money in your savings plan. So they're following that. My younger son is much less like me and much more like my husband. He's like, I don't have the money. I don't care. But he's also a musician and is going to be leading a really different life, right? It's all on him to be saving and investing. And, we've had a lot of talks about how do you think about managing a gig a gig world, when you don't have a 401k, you don't have somebody automatically enrolling you. How do you think about structuring your spending if you have great uncertainty about what your income's going to be like?
Yeah. So, quick question. Given the amount of jargon and how obscure this can be to some people whose day job is this, and this requires a whole nother day job, should young workers go to a financial advisor for help?
I think financial advisors can be incredibly helpful. I think most people starting out have pretty straightforward financial lives. And not to talk what I used to do for a living, I used to manage target date funds for a living, right? So I think a target date fund is a great answer for someone just starting out, or a balanced account, or a robo platform. I don't know that you need a financial advisor unless you are struggling with how to budget and save. And then I think having someone who can help you understand your own finances, understand where your money is going. You know, someone who takes a percentage of your assets when you're just starting out, I think those fees are probably going to be very high, and there might be other places to find that kind of help.
So, Ann, it's now time that we turn our attention to questions that we get from our readers and listeners about money and retirement in the segment that we call Ask Bob. The first question that came in essence, goes like this. Is there an upfront charge when I convert my traditional IRA to a Roth IRA? And in essence, the answer is no, there's no one charging you a fee to do that. But, however, you will be paying ordinary income tax on the distribution from your traditional IRA, and you need to be aware of what that tax will be and how it might affect other things. If you're if you're a Medicare beneficiary, you might be subject to IRMA if that puts you into a higher income bracket. Modified adjusted gross income is the jargony term. And if you're pre-Medicare and on the ACA plan, it could affect the advanced premium tax credit that you get.
And it can also bump you up into a higher tax bracket. So it's interesting. I was just talking to my parents' financial advisor about that. My parents are both in their 90s and doing some chatting about just this subject. And it was going to bump them up like 4 tax brackets if they did a conversion. It's like, well, never mind. We're just going to leave that money right where it is. Thank you very much. Because it would radically alter all kinds of things. Now, most people, again, if you're younger, may not matter that much. We can chat a little bit about, if you're just starting out and have the choice about contributing to a Roth or regular, like we can talk about how you might think about that decision. But that conversion, right, the government's going to make you pay, not necessarily your service provider. That should be free.
Yeah. So one last final word is you don't have to do a full conversion. You can do a partial conversion.
Right.
So another question that came in is, can I withdraw money from my Roth IRA after I've contributed? And the answer is yes, if you've held that for 5 years. Otherwise, you'll pay a penalty on that distribution. And there are a couple other nuances to that. But in essence, if you've had the Roth IRA open for 5 years, you can withdraw money from it. Any thoughts?
Well, 59 and a half is one of those ages that you need to pay attention to. Where the half comes from, I do not know. But that is the age from which you are sort of normally allowed to start withdrawing. Before that, you'd pay a early withdrawal penalty. Roth IRAs have other things you're allowed to pull money out for, down payment on house, education expenses and stuff. So, a Roth gives you a little more flexibility, but you still have to keep an eye on the fine print.
So thank you, Ann, for sharing your thoughts on these questions from our readers and listeners. If you've got questions about money or retirement, email us at askbob@yahoofinance.com. That's all the time we have today on this episode of Decoding Retirement. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll be talking to other experts who can help you plan for and live in retirement.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.